Hey guys, Tightrope here, and today we're taking a look at the 4v4 map submitted to Greyshot's map competition. But first off, a bit of a baseline reading on what we're talking about here. We're on the Relic made map Mignano Gap. So my measurements, I'm going from corner to corner and just doing this, how many seconds it takes roughly in terms of like 60 FPS video. So it's time code. That's my length measurement. Length is always enemy base to enemy base. And then width is the opposite. So that's, if you see my measurements, that's what we're talking about. The aim of this video is not really to share my exact scoring or anything like that. It's to show you guys the map. There is a community voting section as well. So I'll include that in the link down below. So after viewing this video, seeing the maps, you want to get involved, have your say on what you think should win, get to voting. And maybe try some of these maps out as well. These maps, they look great. Some of these maps, tremendous. Really impressed. Hope you enjoy. So here are the stats of the Relic made map Mignano Gap. So we know what we're judging against. In terms of fuel and munitions, it's 45 and 80. And that's the same for both of the Relic made maps. So that's probably the goal that we're looking for in the community made maps as well. This is also the larger of the two Relic maps. And the sector layout doesn't really allow for much cutoff action. And here is the other Relic made map, the Winter Line, a narrow map overall. Exact same amount of fuel and munitions, though the sectors adding up to that are slightly different, and going up to 6 strategic points from 5 that we saw in Mignano Gap. A bit more cutoff play is on offer, and a lot of the fuel is more towards the center of the map. Here are Valley Hill's map stats and sector layout. It's one of the smaller maps submitted, maybe making this more suitable for 3v3. Is also potentially a little bit lower munitions. Maybe 2 of the low points could be switched to mediums, maybe these ones in the center. But I do quite like this sector down here, which allows for some cutoff play, which can often be difficult to implement in team games. Looks good so far. Having a look at the map of Valley Hill. So we start out in the top corner. We've got a bit of a rubbish dump kind of thing here. And right up the hill from it, there's this kind of mansion with these nice columns, which seem to clash a little bit, having a dump next to a prestigious looking building such as this. Not sure if that really fits. Then we come down the hill into a big industrial area. And this continues on, starts out with a bit of a train yard. Overall, quite aesthetically pleasing through this area. Very well filled out with lots of little details, which is nice. Then we've got the train over here, steaming away. That goes off the map. Then we come into, a bit of a town area up this steep hill. And one of the things that is maybe lacking a bit of polish, these buildings on the hill. You can see the doors here, and then there's a massive drop off to the footpath. Doesn't quite align. That's one of the few little errors really on this map. Other than that, it's pretty well fleshed out and detailed, and not too many errors overall. But yeah, anyway, back into the rest of this. We've got a bit of a town here. A lot of 3-story buildings. And then Victory Point. Then the other side of the town, a lot more bashed up, a lot more low health buildings on this side. Some trenches in the area. A little bit asymmetrical in that regard. Could give an advantage to one side over the other. And this would as well. You can see on this side of the hill coming up, no buildings whatsoever compared to on the other side. So again, probably asymmetrical might make this area a bit more difficult for one side over the other. Continuing on down, we've got a huge church in this corner, but more of a town area. And then continuing through, kind of breaks up into farmland. More buildings, and then we're kind of into a ruined area here. We've got a destroyed church, some ancient walls, a bit more farm up here, some flowers, some fruits of some description. Then we've got a bit of an island here, though it's very accessible. Got 2 bridges on each side and a big land crossing through the stream. Now on this side, there's quite a lot of resources. We've got a medium fuel, 2 munitions and a VP, so I imagine this will be quite hotly contested, this portion of the map, and kind of symmetrical crossings on the other side. A bit of a checkpoint kind of set up over here. Bit of a lumber yard going on down here. So overall, this is, quite an industrial area. So this building being here seems a little bit out of place with the rest of the setting. And then into the center, we've got some more kind of ruins. Overall, looks quite a nice place to play through the center of the map. Quite a lot of detail, quite a lot of elevation though as well. And overall, quite a lot of elevation changes in this map and a lot of choke points as well. It being quite a small map also, I feel like maybe this might be more suited to 3v3 than 4v4. But overall, it's a very good looking map. Lots of detail and yeah, nice map. And I'm not really a huge fan of the atmospheric settings, this kind of foggy overlay. It looks kind of bad, especially when Fog of War is turned on. It washes things out a lot. I feel like this is not really a good display for like Co3's graphics, which are already maybe not the best, like in terms of standing out from the background. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the fog atmospheric settings. Here are the map stats and sector layout of crossing the Volturno River. It is the second largest map submitted, and I would say a decent amount larger than the Relic made maps, especially when we look at all the pathways and obstacles that interrupt your unit's movement. The team bases have a 2 and 2 split with a large river going through the center of the map. It also has 5 victory points, which I liked in Code 2, but in Code 3 with the faster VP tick rate, I worry this would make games end a little bit too fast. When it comes to sector layout, there are some interesting strategic points which may allow for some cut-off play, but personally I like to see some kind of higher resource points closer to the center of the map to really give the two teams something to battle over rather than the resources being equally distributed throughout the entire map. Having a look at crossing the Volturno River in-game, obviously the defining characteristic of this map is this large river that runs through the center. So you can see it does have a few crossing points throughout the map. You can see with these shallow things, and I do quite like, some heavy cover as you get across that area of the map. Symmetrical, which is nice. Quite a wide crossing area right through the center, which is good. Try to keep movement, more open straight through the center of the map where most players will want to get through. And then we've got this large bridge down here. It does seem to have a little bit of a graphical glitch where it joins. I don't know if this is just on my computer, but then, yeah, and then a large crossing down here. So, it does restrict movement a decent amount, and definitely you can see there's going to be like elevation on both sides. Could make it quite treacherous coming up and down through here, but it's overall has decent amount of free flowing action considering there's such a large river through the center of the map. And in Company of Heroes 3, water doesn't have like negative cover properties, so crossing this is not going to be as bad as it was in Company of Heroes 2. So having a look at the rest of the map, got a nice little kind of farm area here with some vineyards. Do you have this big kind of rail bridge crossing thing here, which is going to obstruct movement a huge amount. We've got these just huge terraced areas with only little pathways for infantry to get through. Obviously vehicle movement through here is going to be incredibly restricted, only through this tiny little gap here. And overall, like a lot of walls, a lot of high walls through these sectors. We do have some entrances and exits at the edges, but I feel like this is going to heavily restrict the way your infantry move around. And given this is like a reasonably large map as well, adding these kind of massive pathfinding blockers, I feel like it's going to be like a very slow start to the game until a lot of these walls get crushed off by medium tanks and the like. Feels like movement's going to be very restricted, at least in this sector of the map. But then we've got a bit of a town area down here. Good number of buildings, one of the victory points, fuel, bit more kind of farmland. This is where the terraced section ends. So overall, quite pretty, well filled out. Lots of little details, looking good. Nice farmland area through here. Bit of a wooded area, more farms. And then we're coming into the city area. Some high 3-story buildings. But yeah, very well detailed through this section. And then the city centre, quite open overall. Plenty of space here, though it is flanked by these high buildings. It's got some sandbags through the centre, so it's not completely barren. Some spots for you to take cover as well. It is a little bit asymmetrical, though. Down this side we've got a huge city sector, whereas on the other side it is pretty open, but maybe a similar story over here. We've got a few more buildings over here. Well, maybe not actually. So yeah, maybe that will make things a little bit lopsided in terms of balance, having the city asymmetrically positioned like this. But yeah, huge church-like structures down here. Got a nice little fortress kind of looking thing over here. Lots of detail and elevation as well, which could be a bit of an issue. So that's that. And then we've got that big bridge on the other side. The city does kind of continue on this side. So again, with this side being largely farmland, not so densely populated, but both times this side is by far the more urban area, which could be a bit of a worry balance-wise. And again, a lot of very high walls, a lot of pathfinding, obstruction kind of situations. Kind of maybe nice to move some infantry around this, but it feels like it's going to be very, very, channeled into these small areas. Going to need your close quarters units, and as I said, combined with this being such a large map, I feel like it could make things quite slow in the early game. But having a look across here, more farmland, and then we've got this big road that kind of runs down here, which is flanked by buildings on both sides. Opens up into maybe two pathways, quite a few buildings down here. So yeah, a very pretty map, and I do prefer this, the atmospheric settings make it look good. Bit more of an orchard out here. These goats, something unusual about them. You can kind of select them, but not really. Don't know what's going on there in terms of world objects or whatever, but it's a little bit strange. So that's a good look at it. Big map, lots of detail, well filled in, thematically good, but for me, maybe a little bit large, maybe a little bit choke pointy, too restrictive in the early game in terms of pathways that are open to your infantry. But yeah, overall a very good looking map. Here is Hill 209. Measuring corner to corner, it is the largest map submitted. A good distribution of resources. I like the high munitions points put towards the corner to try and encourage fighting on all areas of the map. The strategic points offer a load of cut-off opportunities, probably the best of any map submitted. The overall layout reminds me a lot of the Code 2 map Hill 400, which was one of the more popular 4v4 maps. Here is Hill 209 in-game, and one of the immediate features of this map are these big areas here that are fenced off by barbed wire, these kind of tank graveyards, got a lot of mines there, got a lot of tank traps. These are completely impassable even by a heavy tank. Even a tiger can't crush through this area. These are complete pathing blocks, but you can see through this if it's not blocked by like a smoking wreck, and can also shoot through these gaps. So these are used quite liberally throughout the map as kind of choke points and options for it's a desert map. You can't just fill it up with trees or walls or whatever like you can with some other of the landscapes. So that's one way to kind of get around it, and that makes sense. Decent idea. So up here we've got a bunch of these little trenches kind of guarding this Muni depot with Muni point up here. A few more of these pathing blockers north of the map. You may have noticed in my overlay before, all these vehicle healths. These are of vehicle wrecks that are around the map. You can't salvage these for resources. So I did double check that just in case. But yeah, if you do use the tactical map in 4v4s, not that likely. At the moment they do have a health bar. I imagine that's just like a limitation of how many objects you can have. Like some of these will be like baked in assets, whereas some of these would have been like pre-destroyed vehicles not available in the world builder. I imagine that's something to try and get around that limitation, offer a bit more variety. So that's yeah, thought it was worth mentioning. So here we are up in the top. This is a bit of that extra area, so which no one's probably going to play in, kind of adding to the width of the map, or my width measurements as well. Got some big trenches down this side, covering this hotly contested, I imagine this will be, muni point. So this is the north of the map. It's a bit more open, a bit more of a desert, a bit more desolate than the south, which we'll be getting to shortly. And then here we are coming into the center. Elevated, but not like real sharp elevations. I imagine there won't be a huge amount of elevation bonuses going on based on the ranges and the relatively mild gradient. So it's not going to be crazy elevation bonuses. It's not going to be a complete slog trying to fight your way up to the hill. It's not that high. But yeah, plenty of like obstacles, options for flanking. Shouldn't make machine guns dominant through this area or anything like that. Could open up some cheeky opportunities for grenades or, you know, units that shoot over these kind of obstacles effectively to shine. And then close to the base, here we have a look. So it's filled out pretty well, I think, considering this is a desert map. I imagine this is quite a challenging type of terrain style of map to produce in terms of filling it out. So I can appreciate that. You know, not a super common map style that we've encountered so far in Company of Heroes. But here we are in the south now, a few more trees down this area, a lot of flaming tank wrecks. Again, these kind of trenches on the high muni point. And then down here we've got a bit of greenery along this stream. A few more trees down here. Shrubbery. But yeah, overall, very balanced on both sides, I would say. So overall, I do appreciate the effort that's gone into making a desert-type landscape work for a map while not feeling completely barren. And, you know, creative use of this kind of sector to offer some kind of obstacles that would maybe make sense in a landscape like this. Quite creative. Here is Inferno. It's one of the smaller maps that's been submitted, maybe straddling the line between kind of a crowded 4v4 or a spacious 3v3 map. Maybe it could be used in both map pools. When it comes to resources, it's a little low in the fuel department, and given the layout of the fuel sectors, there's only one safe fuel close to each team's base, will make it difficult to build resource caches as well, so this would lead to much lower fuel income than players would be used to. There is some cutoff potential for the high muni points and fuels down the south, and on the opposite end is the only medium fuel on the map, so that should encourage the teams to play for those different areas at different stages of the game, depending on what resources they want. Here is Inferno, another desert-themed map, though a little bit more rocky, more vegetative than Hill 209 that we just saw before. And we've got this section here, but you can run through this. It's not blocking movement like we just saw on the hill. So having a look over the map. Yeah, a lot of effort's gone into, I think, like texturing the ground, which fills things out quite nicely considering there's not a lot of objects. Not a lot of things like providing cover or blocking compared to some of the other maps, but it doesn't feel barren in spite of there not being like a huge amount of stuff here because it's so well painted with all these ground textures. So that's nice. Got one building in the center here, not a huge number of windows on it either. Pretty much the only impactful building on this map. There are a couple other small ones elsewhere. Yeah, very, very open. A few like pathfinding obstacles here, but largely not many vision blocking objects on this map. Very open in terms of sight. Could lead to issues with, you know, like long sight giving units being a little bit too strong. Maybe long range units as well. Things like the flak, 88mm flak, or the 17 pounder. Yeah, having a look through. Down here in the bottom here, this is where I imagine a lot of the action will be focused. We've got, you know, 3 high immunity points kind of all clustered down here. So I imagine this will be a pretty hotly contested area. You might even see like 3 players kind of playing down here, and then like a 1v1 in the north. I could imagine that happening with this kind of sector layout. And especially, you know, in the later stages, where you're kind of just fighting to hold on to 2 of these VPs and the majority of the resources. And here's one of the main, like, obstacles on the map. This big crevasse here, I guess you'd call it, filled with flames. But other than that, there's not a huge amount of, like, vision blocking and pathfinding blocking obstacles. Maybe this map's, like, a little bit too open in that regard, though I do think it is painted quite well. Does feel very nicely fleshed out. Looks great, but you know, it lends itself to a certain style of gameplay. But if we compare features like left to right, very balanced. You know, you can see all of these ridges kind of mirrored on both sides. Most of like these big obstacles, you know, roughly mirrored on each side. So yeah, should lead to quite balanced gameplay. Maybe feels like this base is slightly closer to this area than this one. I'm not entirely sure about that. I haven't measured it, but that could potentially be a balance issue. Here is King of the Hill. It has around triple the amount of resources as a normal map, so it's not really competitively viable. It's also by far the longest map submitted, so it's a long way to go to get to the enemy's base. But it's also quite narrow, and that's really amplified by these lakes that block pathfinding, and otherwise quite a few pathfinding blockers on the map. And the victory points are quite unusually spaced. Overall, this is not an auto-match viable map. Having a look at King of the Hill in-game, and you have these kind of 2 split bases, only 1 exit from them. And then having a look across the landscape, quite a lot of just open green fields, not a lot of texture, kind of missing some detail. I'm not a huge fan of this atmospheric or lighting setting. It makes the game look a little bit blue, but you know, it's not completely terrible. Across the map. And here we go. We've got these like lakes with a high fuel you have to run across the bridge to get to. Coming down this side. A big poppy field down here. Nice little train situation. Coming up the hill as well. We've got this church up here, which is kind of nice. I imagine any elderly people having to get to church are going to be bit upset that they have to come up this crazy steep path. And we've got a little bit of a town square area. It doesn't really ring true to like an actual landscape, right? Something like this. Such a steep hill as well. Obviously, like, trains can't go up something that's this steep IRL. Unless they're one of those like special ones with the wheels. But we're just getting sidetracked, aren't we? Talking about trains now. Another big pathfinding blocking lake with a fuel point in the middle of it. A little bit more of a forest area, big poppy field down here. But yeah, a lot of areas that may be lacking a bit of detail compared to the other map, especially just in these kind of vanilla areas. Just lacking texture, lacking details to flesh them out a bit more. A little bit of a town area down here. Around big high buildings here, a little bit of a city type area. Lighthouse out into the other lake on the far edge. Then we've got these really steep hills coming up, really just like unrealistically steep, I'd say, for these kind of, yeah, in terms of making this look like it's somewhere that could exist in the world. Yeah, at the top of this, we've got this factory, some buildings that, you know, I don't know if these buildings don't really gel harmoniously with these other ones. Just, yeah. Not harmoniously constructed, I'll say. Here we have Oasis Depot. I think it's a good size overall. Good distribution of resources also. One of the key features, we have a river running down the center with an island in the middle. 2 low fuels there and a victory point. somewhat limited access, especially for vehicles to that area, so it's good that medium or high resource points were not put in that center island. Only 4 strategic points, which could hurt Africa Core players for manpower, and they do provide some massive cut-off potential as well, especially to the medium fuels that are quite close to each team's base. Having a look at Oasis Depot, so coming out of the base here, we've got a little bit of a thing next to the munitions point. We've got the bridge, got 2 kind of canyon walls next to this. But then it does open up if you come down into here. I guess this is the Oasis part of Oasis Depot. Some nice greenery through this area in the center, flanking the river. It is quite challenging to get light vehicles through this. Mediums can crush these trees, but early on, this is going to be a pretty big obstacle. Like, they don't block vision, but they do block your light vehicles. So light vehicle pathing for the middle is going to be quite challenging. I could maybe see like these northern players and southern players on the edges using light vehicles and whatnot, but players playing through the middle, much more reliant on infantry and team weapons. Coming back up to the north here. Quite open up here. We've got some ancient looking ruins, one of the VPs. Be overall quite open on the flanks, you know, the furthest point away from each team's base. Reasonably open through here, but well detailed, lots of nice shrubbery and quite green as you expect being this close to the river. Quite fitting with the name Oasis, I'd say, the theme, looking very spiffing. A little bit blank out here, honestly, but then we're going into this area. Got a bit of a city type area, a few buildings. One of the big cut-offs down here, and crossing into the bridge into the island area. So we've got a few pathways in here, like a little bit of a land bridge there. I think vehicles can fit through there as well. A few little pathways that only infantry can get through, like coming down through these rivers. Quite tricky. But overall, I think pretty decently designed. It's similar story down here. Got a little pathway up here, some pathways through here, and then that kind of bridge. So mirroring, I think balance-wise, this does seem to be quite a fair map for both spawns, which is nice to see. And even, you know, with this, like, you can see like the little turning away from the sides. Yeah, I think it looks pretty good balance-wise to me. And yeah, we've got the city area on the other side as well, so mirroring in that regard as well. Come across here.
We have vehicles available in reserve.
Quite open down this side, maybe a little bit less open than the other spawn because of this big kind of rock formation in the center. Maybe slightly more free-flowing into the river crossing. But yeah, kind of an industrial section down here as opposed to the ruins. I think thematically it works quite well overall. And here we are close to the other side's base. But yeah, it seems well detailed. So I think if you're going to be doing something with a big river running down the center of your map, overall this is implemented it quite effectively. Don't feel like it would block things up too much, though I would have to probably play on the map to see how it feels fighting through the island area. Here is Traverses. This is the smallest map that has been submitted by quite a lot, making it more suitable for 3v3s. The sector layout looks quite even for both teams, and there are quite a lot of munitions that are close to both spawns, relatively safe and easy to hold on to, so that should make up for the fact the map is a little bit lower in munitions overall. And these strategic points should allow some cutoffs of the medium resources located close to the center of the map. Having a look at Traverses in-game, and the first thing that will strike you is the unusual lighting on this map. Very orange hue. Kind of reminds me of when there were some wildfires in Australia a couple of years ago, and the smoke kind of blew its way across to New Zealand. And it did actually look like this, a lot like this. The lights, very strange, very surreal lighting. But looking at the rest of the map, I don't think I'm a big fan of lighting overall. There's like units look very flat on it, but I don't know, maybe you guys will enjoy it. Having a look at across the map, it seems quite dark. Got this nice little orchard area outside these houses. Bit of an industrial area. Reasonable number of buildings close to the spawn. Bit of a port area down the bottom here. And this is the dominant feature of the map. Got a big river running through the center of the map. Kind of snakes its way across. But compared to Oasis, this has much fewer crossings. We've got like one big bridge. You can squeeze like a tank through here. At least like a medium tank. Throw out the tiger. And then you got these like little pedestrian type bridges. Big bridge in the center. Pedestrian crossing this. So I feel like this is maybe a little bit too choke pointy to really make its way into auto match. This kind of bridge layout running through the center of the map feels a little bit too much of an obstacle, in my opinion, compared to Oasis at least. We'll look through the rest on this side. We have a big wall down here. Unusual lighting in this area kind of reminds me of the screenshots that they often provide of like these maps, and we never really get to see them in game with that kind of lighting, but this kind of reminds me of those Relic provided screenshots of different maps. I wonder if that's how they get that lighting effect or their screenshots. Nice like courtyard kind of area. Very scenic. Looks good. No, because of the lighting, quite dull. But the same area on this side, same style of lighting. Bit of a graveyard up here alongside the church. Big barn house, I suppose you'd say, up there. Similar amount of buildings close to the spawn on the other side of the map. So, maybe a little bit impassable down in this corner for this player. Big row of buildings, cliff limits their exits from their base a touch. You can see that it does kind of go narrow in the center, so that's why it seems so narrow in the width measurement, because it does kind of curve in. So you can kind of see the sector edges. Bit of a windmill up here. So overall, I think for me, the river through the center leads to a little bit too much choke point style play. Not really a huge fan of that personally. And I don't really like the lighting that much either. But it's very well fleshed out, very picturesque, this map. Quite a good looker in spite of the lighting. Very high detail. Might even, it just looks really sharp. Might even be the best one I've seen so far in terms of looks. Here is Italian Beach Landing. I generally say this is a good size for a 4v4 map. However, movement channels on this map are very restrictive, so it'd take you quite a long time to get to where you need to go very often. The beach landing bases are also more spread out than the ones in the north. This could lead to potential balance issues. The map is on the high side when it comes to resources, though I wouldn't imagine that being much of a problem because it is dominated by these two cutoffs on each side, containing 2 medium munitions and 1 medium fuel, so I imagine this area will be cut off almost constantly. Having a look at Italian Beach Landing in game. And now we're starting in this corner. So we've got a bunch of little pathways coming up this hill. All funnel into this choke point here. Comes up to this low munitions point. So quite a lot of elevation here. Very narrow pathways. I imagine you could mine this or demo charge this if you could get up here. Also one pathway in from this side as well. Onto a strategic point which does a little bit of cutting off, not really a huge one. It's kind of symmetrical, this side to this side and this side to this side. So a lot of buildings through here. This is one of the main vehicle channels. I'd say overall this map, not very friendly for vehicles, very dense with buildings and pathfinding blocking obstacles. So this is one of the main vehicle channels coming down this left-hand side up to a medium muni point. And then we've got this medium fuel in here. A lot of choke points coming in here. Fog of War also behaves a little bit unusually through this area with the castles. You can see I can run through this gap, but I can't see through this until I'm like already getting through the gap. So it behaves a little bit unusually. Maybe it's the shrubs kind of covering these gaps up a little bit or something. Not sure whether that's good. Overall, this will give a massive advantage to close quarters infantry. So yeah, a little bit unusual with the Fog of War in this area of the map. And there's the medium muni. So, this cutoff here, incredibly important with all these points. So many resources available. I imagine this cutoff would be a huge point of contention, and is reasonably open, at least in this area. Should allow for some decent fights here, though huge amounts of elevation variance. With this amount, the elevation bonus would be kicking in like crazy. Any unit trying to come in from the bottom. Such a steep gradient here, which is maybe not such a good idea. As well as that, having such a steep elevation will probably cause a lot of tank projectile issues trying to fire uphill. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of this kind of setup gameplay wise. There we go, like a little bit of a choke point coming into this area as well. And same over here. Very easy to mine off if you manage to get down here. So yeah, very unfriendly, I'd say, to vehicles, this map. But it is very well filled in. Looking quite nice. Got a nice vineyard down here. Very open. This is probably one of the most open areas of the map. Back into the city. And the city very dense with buildings. You're going to need your flamers, your anti-garrison tools for sure. In a situation like this as well, like breach just isn't really going to work. And even mortars not going to have much success because a unit could just jump out of a building and jump into the one slightly next door. It's going to have to be a flamer unit to counter this really. It does restrict the gameplay when you have so many buildings like this in an area. Got a little bit of a courtyard that is mirrored on the other side. Roughly. But yeah, I could imagine, this Italian beach landing theme. It does look like an Italian town you could imagine close to the beach. Nice little train situation going on here. I will say that units do tend to disappear in this kind of terrain as well. Their camouflage does make them hide very well. Overall, I don't really have an issue with the atmospheric settings. It does seem to match the theme of the map. So down the center, we have these bridges, and they are somewhat restrictive, switching from side to side. Got a, regional-sized bridge there, maybe 2 abreast. You could get a tank through here. Quite a narrow one. You can crush these banisters. I've done it down here. So it does allow tanks to come through here 2 abreast as well. This area, I'd say this one is maybe a little bit restrictive for vehicles to move through the center. With the pathfinding system at the moment, you can see it requires some very precise movement, slows things down a lot. I'll probably try to remove this, open this area up a bit. And to clean up the center. Yeah, we've got some big elevation changes through this area. Again, some very restricted access coming into the middle as well. Got the big channels coming up through here. And then on the other side, we've got this kind of manor area after this orchard. Big courtyard. Church, perhaps. Couple structures like that. 3 in a row. I imagine, a lot of fences here would make team weapons an absolute nightmare to move around through this area. Something to keep in mind. So this map, in general, not very friendly to vehicles. And I'd say team weapons would probably struggle in some regards as well, but could also be incredibly powerful since there are quite a lot of choke points. You kind of need to use infantry to pass through all these little channels, but then they could be completely shut down by a machine gun just covering these tiny areas. So I think gameplay-wise, that does cause some issues. Here we are back on the other side with the city area. Some crazy, like, narrow pathways with little channels for infantry to work through. Yeah, I mean, it could be interesting. Could be a bit of a nightmare. Definitely going to need your close quarters infantry to fight through this section. I imagine Guastatori would be the absolute top infantry. I think nothing else would really hold a candle to them fighting through here. So that could be a bit of a balance concern since they're so good at close range and so good against garrisons. I imagine this would be very lopsided for a Guastatori player. And here we are on the other side. So yeah, overall, I think like gameplay-wise, and here we are on the beach. Gameplay-wise, I think this would lead to some issues, this kind of map design. Not a map I'd prefer to play on with the elevation, with the narrow channels. Yeah, I think lopsided for balance. Here is the Steppe, a Code 3 reimagining of the Code 2 map. Size-wise, I think it's great, pretty much bang on where it needs to be. It is a little low in both fuel and munitions, but I feel there are not many cut-off opportunities on this map, and there aren't many higher resource points through the center of the map for the players to really battle over. So overall, resource-wise, it would probably work out fine, but gameplay-wise, I feel that is a bit of a step backwards. Having a look at the Steppe in-game. So I've got a bit of a city area down here. So the low fuel. Low munis. Bit of a, red desert compared to a lot of the more yellow sand deserts that we've seen so far. So it's a nice change of pace. Pretty open. Should, true to the Steppe form, should allow for some good tank fights. Got these medium munitions right in the corner, both sides really pushed right into the far edge, encouraging play all the way up to here. Quite open near the VP, should allow for some good fights. Plenty of space. Yeah, looks good. I do like the theme and the setting. Does ring true to a Code 2 remake of the Steppe, or Code 3 remake of the Code 2 map. Look through the city area here. It does seem to be pretty balanced on both sides. Pretty even spread. Maybe this one has slightly more access to this area, but it's not a VP in this case. The VP's been switched to being more in the center. It's just a low munitions point. Might not make a huge difference. Got a... Yeah, okay. Now we do have roofs on both sides, so it should be reasonably even. Maybe like these low windows won't have access because of this higher wall. Whereas this side, all windows will be firing. Slight balance thing there. Okay, nice, nice, nice. Lots of cliffs. Here we come into the center of the map. Very reminiscent of the Steppe. This side has, some sandbags. This side's got some tank traps instead. Though, the tank shots wise, I'd say this is maybe a little bit better with the elevation. But that's alright. So yeah, now we've got the VP in the center instead of a high fuel. Not completely symmetrical both sides, but relatively even with the cover positions. I don't think that cause too many gameplay issues. Nice to provide some variability. And here, true to the steps kind of layout. If we have a look at the fog of war though through this area, oops.
Listen up.
You would, I think I'd probably expect to be able to see down this cliff if I'm positioned on the top here, and sometimes you can get a brief like pop of vision. But yeah, you can't really see over either of these, which I think on first impressions, I would expect to be able to see. Maybe you can't see units like directly under the cliff, but probably like a little bit further out, I'd expect to be able to see. So it's maybe a little bit of a quirk, something I wasn't expecting to function based on initial impressions. Be pretty symmetrical on both sides coming into this central area. And we got these channels coming down to this point. Maybe slightly more closed off than up there with all these walls and stuff, but still plenty of room for tanks. Good line of sight for team weapons. I think that should cause some open play. Good for lots of vehicles. But still, do have some choke points. You could maybe, plant a couple of mines on to shut down movements as well. So yeah, I think this map overall would lead to some good play, and the kind of team play that I enjoy. Though I do think that the sector layout wise, you don't have a high amount of resources to battle through over the center, so it doesn't really encourage as much like fighting over those high resource points in the middle like we had in the Code 2 map. Maybe you're pushed a bit more into the corners. The center of the map a little bit barren in terms of what you're trying to fight for there, and the cutoff play is lacking compared to some of the other maps we've seen so far. So maybe this map, it looks good in terms of layout in game and how everything's distributed, but maybe the sectors could use a bit of a rework. Here is Tobruk, very similar to the Winter Line size-wise, though all of these cliffs through the center of the map do make it feel a bit more narrow width-wise. When it comes to sector layout, you do have quite a lot of safe resources right next to your base, then some very aggressive cut-offs. Then in the center we've got a lot of resources as well as all of the victory points, so there's a lot to fight over in the center of the map. I think I'd have to play a few matches on this map to see how the sector layout works out. Having a look around at Tobruk, just starting in this corner, it seems like a little bit less detailed than some of the other maps we've seen, just by a slight margin. Still, I'd say, roughly adequate. But just, in terms of how things are filled in, like you don't have to chuck like heaps and heaps of stuff in, but just, to me at least it feels a little bit less polished or detailed than some of the other maps in that regard. A big like hangar area here for the left-hand VP, destroyed hangar type setup, and kind of linking into this off-screen kind of industrial area. Looks like maybe there's supposed to be a bit of a runway down here, so it's a nice little detail out on the left-hand side. But this big rock coming down this sector, which does seem to extend further to the north than to the south. Maybe a slight discrepancy there, but not a huge deal. Have a look in the north. A few sandbags, trenches coming up here. But I don't know, it feels a little bit less like cohesive of a layout. There's enough detail here largely, but just feels, I don't know, something's lacking in cohesion, and how it feels to me at least. Nice little beach area, quite open as well. This area could lead to some good tank fighting. So we've got a few obstacles and elevation changes, bit of a lighthouse out here. Going through the center of the map again, we've got a few channels narrowing things down, so it's a bit more of a laney map than we've seen from a lot of the other maps so far. Reminds me a little bit more of maybe Red Bull in that regard. Yeah, medium munitions in the center, so I imagine the center with all of these points very hotly contested. Reminds me a bit more of a Code 2 map than a lot of the other maps we've seen so far in that regard. Seems to be like a lot of fighting focused in the center sections. Whoever can dominate there would do well. Again, we've got some more obstacles providing a bit more of a lane type feel. But still, you know, we've got some big channels when things do open up to move through. We do have some tank traps here, maybe limiting vehicle movement here. Could be quite nasty when it comes to mines. But
available in reserve.
and we'll look through. We've got some destroyed artillery pieces here with a lot of spent shells, it looks like. Buildings through the center. Continuing on with the kind of industrial destroyed type theme up here. Okay. Yeah, it seems fine, you know, a bit more of a laney map. I do like, you know, a lot of fighting for the center. But yeah, maybe a touch narrow because all those lanes kind of chopping things up, even though it's roughly the same as the winter line. Seems like these do, you know, force things a bit more into a choke point, and straight ahead play is going to dominate. And also, yeah, and also when it comes to just the general overall filling out of the map, I don't know, theme-wise, doesn't seem that cohesive. Just, yeah, I don't know. There's something about it that just doesn't seem quite like realistic, or you know, the way things are laid out. There's just something not quite there for me. So I hope you've enjoyed this overview of the community-made maps available in this competition, and here is the voting form. I will include a link to this in the video description. Get onto it and also try out these maps as well. I'll include a Steam Workshop playlist kind of thing of the maps so you can subscribe to them easily. Thank you for watching. See you next time. And if you enjoyed this video, I hope you consider coming on board as a Patreon backer.